My hands were still shaking from the hospital IV when I stepped out of the car and saw the bright red sold sign stabbed into my front lawn. It stood there like a cruel announcement to the world that my life had been taken without my permission. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, walked toward me with a sweet smile that didn't match the sharpness in her eyes. She wrapped her arm around me and said, "You won't have to worry about this old house anymore, Mom. Me and Michael will take care of you now." I felt my breath catch, not from my heart condition, but from shock. This was the house my late husband built with his own hands. Every brick held a memory. I tried to speak, but before I could ask any questions, Vanessa cheerfully added, "Your things have already been moved into our guest room. Everything is handled." Handled, as if my life was a package she could sign for and store away. That night, when I checked my bank account to see if the money from the house sale had been deposited, there was nothing, not a single dollar. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I realized something wasn't just wrong. It was intentional. This is the story of how the people I trusted the most tried to steal everything I had, and how I stood up at Thanksgiving dinner with one document that changed everything. If you were in my place, would you stay silent or fight back? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because what happened next is something every family needs to hear. My name is Linda Hayes. I am 62 years old, a retired school librarian, and until recently, I believed my life, although quiet, was safe. I lived in a cozy 2-story home in Maplewood, a small town where neighbors still wave when they pass by. My husband, Daniel, passed away 3 years ago after fighting cancer. Losing him felt like losing the sun in my sky. The house was the one thing that made me feel connected to him. He built the porch swing, painted my reading room yellow because he said it matched my smile, and planted the oak tree in our backyard the year our son Michael was born. Michael grew up kind and curious, always holding my hand when we walked to school. But after he married Vanessa, everything changed. Vanessa was beautiful, confident, and knew how to charm people. She always called me Mom in public, hugged me, and showered me with compliments. But when we were alone, she spoke to me like I was a burden. At first, I thought it was stress. I tried to win her over with kindness, telling myself she would eventually accept me as family. A month before everything happened, I collapsed while gardening. I was rushed to the hospital and diagnosed with a heart condition. The doctor said I needed surgery and weeks of rest afterward. Vanessa immediately stepped in and told me not to worry. She said she and Michael would manage everything while I recovered. I remember holding her hand and thanking her with tears in my eyes, believing she truly cared. While I was in the hospital, cards and flowers came from friends and neighbors, but Michael rarely visited, and when he did, Vanessa was always with him, controlling the conversations, telling me everything was handled at home. She spoke with a gentle tone, like she was doing me a favor. I trusted her. That trust was my mistake. When I was finally discharged, all I wanted was to go home, sit on my porch swing, and breathe in the air that still smelled like Daniel's aftershave when the wind moved just right. Instead, I stepped into a nightmare. Vanessa and Michael didn't take me to my home. They drove me straight to their house. My suitcase was already packed in their guest room. My photos, my clothes, even my late husband's military flag. Everything was gone from my home. When I asked where my belongings were, Vanessa said, "We took care of everything. The house has been sold. Your things were donated. You're starting fresh." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Starting fresh. As if my entire life was something she could erase. I sat in that guest room surrounded by beige walls that held no memories, clutching my husband's empty picture frame. That was the moment a painful truth settled over my heart. I wasn't being cared for. I was being controlled. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, disoriented by the unfamiliar scent of Vanessa's lavender candles and the faint sound of her voice echoing from downstairs. I sat up slowly, my chest tight, not from weakness, but from a growing sense of dread I could no longer ignore. I walked into the hallway and stopped when I heard her speaking on the phone, her tone low and smug. Once the funds clear, we'll be able to move forward with the lake house. Michael thinks it's still tied up in probate, but I handled it. She won't question anything. She's too fragile to cause trouble. My breath caught as the words funds and lake house slammed into my mind like crashing waves. My home, the place where Daniel's ashes were buried under the oak tree, had been sold, and the money was being used for Vanessa's dream life. There had been no discussion, no permission, no respect. It was theft. But what hurt me more than the financial betrayal was the emotional one. My own son was either complicit or completely controlled. As I stood there trying not to cry, Vanessa ended the call and saw me. She didn't look shocked or ashamed. She looked annoyed, like I had eavesdropped on something that was none of my business. "Mom, you really should rest. Stress is not good for your heart," she said, placing her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that looked gentle but felt like a warning. I pulled away and asked her directly where the money from the house sale had gone. Her expression hardened for a brief second before she smiled again, that practiced smile she used at church and family gatherings. "Michael and I decided to take care of everything for you. You have a place in our home. You won't need money anymore. We'll handle all your finances from now on. It's better this way." That was the moment I realized she didn't just take my house. She was trying to take my independence, my dignity, and the last pieces of my life that still felt like mine. I demanded to see the paperwork, but she told me it was too complicated and that I should focus on my recovery instead of making things harder for everyone. Later that day, I asked Michael privately if he knew where the money from the sale had gone. He rubbed his forehead and sighed heavily before saying, "Vanessa said we needed to secure our financial future. You'll be living with us now. It's what Dad would have wanted." Hearing him use his father's memory to justify Vanessa's actions broke something inside me. Daniel had always trusted Michael to be a protector, not a passive observer. The emotional distance between me and my son felt wider than it ever had. For the rest of the week, Vanessa monitored every move I made. She adjusted my medication schedule without consulting my doctor and insisted on holding onto my phone so I wouldn't be stressed by unnecessary calls. One afternoon, I found her in my room going through my purse. When I confronted her, she said she was checking for expired prescriptions. That night, I tried logging into my bank account, but my password had been changed. Vanessa claimed it was because she linked the accounts for easier management. I felt like a prisoner living in a home that wasn't mine. I was losing control over everything, from my finances to my own physical freedom. The final push came when I overheard Vanessa telling Michael's sister on the phone that she planned to convince Michael to put me in an assisted living facility once the lake house was finalized. She said, "She'll be out of the way soon. Once that's done, everything will be in our name." That was when I knew I could no longer wait or hope for my son to see the truth. If I didn't act, I would lose not only what Daniel had left me, but my entire future. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind shifting from grief to determination. They thought I was weak. They thought my silence meant surrender. But they had forgotten one thing. This house, this money, this life, they were built by me and my husband from decades of sacrifice. I decided at that moment that I would not let Vanessa bury me while I was still alive. The next morning, while Vanessa was at the gym and Michael was at work, I pretended to be resting. Instead, I called the one person Vanessa didn't know I had a connection with, Daniel's attorney, Mr. Brandon Cole. My voice trembled as I explained everything, but when he answered, his tone was steady and confident. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I believe your husband suspected something like this could happen. We need to meet immediately. Do not tell anyone, and whatever you do, stay calm. They've broken the law and I can prove it." In that moment, I felt a spark of hope. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I realized I was not alone, and the fight for my life had just begun. The morning I met with Mr. Cole marked the moment my fear transformed into silent resolve. I waited until Vanessa left for her usual Pilates class and Michael had gone to work. Then I slipped out quietly, telling the housekeeper I needed fresh air. My legs trembled as I stepped into the attorney's office, but something inside me felt stronger than it had in months. Mr. Cole greeted me with a firm handshake and a calm expression that immediately grounded me. As I told him everything, how my house had been sold while I was unconscious in the hospital, how Vanessa had transferred my belongings and taken control of my finances, how my bank accounts were locked, he nodded, listening carefully without interruption. When I finished, he reached into his file cabinet and pulled out a thick envelope with my husband's handwriting across the front. My heart nearly stopped when I saw Daniel's name. Mr. Cole explained that a year before Daniel passed, he had updated his will and added protective clauses in case anyone attempted to exploit me during illness or grief. My breath caught when Mr. Cole said, "Your husband knew your kindness could be used against you. He wanted to make sure you were never alone." Inside the envelope were documents that not only invalidated any unauthorized sale of our home, but also proved that any transaction made without my signed consent while I was under medical care would be legally void. Mr. Cole had also pulled the house transfer records and discovered that Vanessa had forged my signature using a power of attorney document filed illegally while I was sedated in the hospital. The fraud was clear and punishable by law. Hearing this did not bring me joy at first, only sorrow that the woman I welcomed into my family had gone this far. But sorrow quickly turned into strength as Mr. Cole laid out the plan. We would not confront her immediately. Instead, we would gather bank records, recorded phone calls, and witness statements. We would file the legal motion at the exact moment Vanessa felt most secure, during the upcoming Thanksgiving dinner she herself was hosting, where she planned to announce her pregnancy and show off the progress on the lake house she had purchased with my stolen money. Mr. Cole suggested we use her own pride as the stage for her downfall. I hesitated at first. The idea of publicly exposing my own son's wife in front of family felt humiliating and heartbreaking. But then I thought of Daniel. I thought of the promises we made to protect what we built together. I also thought of my granddaughter Lily, whose future I refused to let Vanessa control. I agreed to the plan, signing the documents that would immediately freeze all transactions connected to the fraudulent sale and transfer the title of my home back into my name as soon as court proceedings were triggered. Over the next week, I pretended to be the same obedient, grateful mother-in-law Vanessa believed she could manipulate. Every time she bragged about how the lake house contractor said they could move in by spring, I smiled and nodded, even as my heart steeled itself for what was coming. I documented every interaction, recorded her conversations when she spoke openly about money, and forwarded her emails to Mr. Cole. Michael remained unaware of everything, too occupied with work and too devoted to Vanessa to question her decisions. The night before Thanksgiving, Vanessa approached me with a satisfied expression and told me to wear something tasteful but simple because she and Michael were going to make a special announcement in front of the whole family. Her tone carried the arrogance of someone who thought she had already won. I went to my room, closed the door, and held Daniel's photo in my hands. I told him aloud that justice was coming, not just for me, but to protect our family's legacy. That night, I barely slept, not from fear, but from anticipation. I could feel everything building toward a moment that would not only reveal the truth, but restore my dignity. I knew Vanessa saw me as weak, and that was exactly what would make her downfall swift and undeniable. The next day, as guests arrived, the air filled with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pies, and Vanessa floated around, greeting everyone with the elegance of a queen certain of her reign. But what she didn't know was that justice was already on its way. Mr. Cole and 2 officers were waiting outside in an unmarked car. Every second that passed brought me closer to reclaiming not only my home and my independence, but my power. And for the first time in a long time, I felt unbreakable. Thanksgiving dinner began with the kind of staged perfection Vanessa had spent weeks preparing. Her dining table glowed with golden cutlery, embroidered napkins, and centerpieces made of autumn leaves she ordered from a designer catalog. She moved around the table like the star of a show, greeting relatives with air kisses and dramatic smiles, while my son, Michael, followed behind her, beaming with pride. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, not at the head where the matriarch usually sits, but near the window, as if I were a guest in someone else's life. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter until Vanessa clinked her glass for attention. "Everyone," she said with grand enthusiasm, "thank you for being here to celebrate family, gratitude, and new beginnings. Michael and I have an important announcement that will change our lives forever." My heart pounded, not from nerves, but from the anticipation of the moment I had been preparing. Vanessa placed a hand over her stomach and dramatically paused as gasps rose from the table. "We're expecting a baby," she said. Relatives applauded. Michael kissed her cheek. She held her head high, glowing with smug triumph. Then she turned toward me and said loudly, "And we are building a new family home by the lake, thanks to Mom's generous contribution. It's what Daniel would have wanted, for all of us to live as one family." Murmurs spread through the room. Some relatives nodded approvingly, believing the touching narrative, but others glanced at me with confusion, likely remembering how deeply I loved my home. I stood up slowly, the room falling silent as I reached into my handbag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Vanessa's smile froze in place, and Michael's forehead wrinkled as he looked from me to the envelope. "Before we continue celebrating," I said in a steady voice, "I need to clear up a misunderstanding." At that exact moment, the front door opened, and Mr. Cole entered with 2 officers. Gasps erupted around the table. Vanessa's eyes widened for the first time that evening, and the confident mask she wore began to crack. Mr. Cole approached the table with calm authority and opened his briefcase. "These are legal documents regarding the fraudulent sale of Mrs. Hayes's property," he announced as every pair of eyes turned toward Vanessa. The home was sold using forged signatures while she was under medical sedation. That transaction has been voided. All assets connected to the sale are frozen pending criminal investigation. Michael stood up in disbelief. "Fraudulent? What are you talking about?" he demanded. Mr. Cole handed him the document showing the forged power of attorney. Vanessa's handwriting traced over mine. Vanessa began to stammer. "This is a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect her. She's been sick and unstable." But her words were drowned out by the officers stepping forward. I looked at the family and spoke firmly, not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her life. "My home was never yours to sell. My life is not yours to control. And today everyone will know the truth." Michael turned to Vanessa, confusion turning into horror as he read the documents. "Did you do this? Did you forge Mom's signature?" Vanessa's face twisted with desperation. "I did it for us, for our future. She doesn't need that house. She would have wasted the money." Mr. Cole then revealed the final blow, my late husband's amended will, which protected me and legally prevented any transfer of our estate without my notarized consent. The entire table fell into stunned silence. Vanessa stepped back, shaking her head, as if trying to deny reality. She tried to grab Michael's arm, but he pulled away, his face pale and full of betrayal. "You stole from my mother," he whispered. Before Vanessa could respond, the officers placed her in handcuffs. She screamed that she was pregnant, that this was a family matter, but the truth now stood fully exposed. As she was escorted out, she turned to me with a look of pure rage, but there was no power left in her eyes. The authority she had built through manipulation crumbled in front of everyone. I remained standing as Mr. Cole announced that all stolen funds would be returned, the house legally restored to my name, and a protective order placed to prevent further exploitation. Michael sat down, burying his face in his hands, finally realizing the depth of the betrayal. The room stayed silent, not out of shock alone, but out of respect. They were witnessing not just a legal victory, but a woman reclaiming her dignity. I looked at my family and said clearly, "This is not just about a house. This is about my life." my husband's legacy, and every senior who has been taken advantage of by people they trusted. Today is the day I stand up, not just for myself, but for every person who has ever been made to feel powerless. The officers led Vanessa out the door, and the heavy silence that followed was not filled with pity, but with realization. The truth had been spoken, justice had arrived, and everything had changed. The days following Vanessa's arrest were heavy with silence, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that forces reflection. My son, Michael, barely spoke for 2 days, walking through his home as though he had just awakened from a long dream he didn't realize he was trapped in. On the 3rd morning, he knocked on my door with tear-filled eyes and asked if we could sit down. He said he had believed Vanessa when she told him everything she did was out of love and protection for our family, and that I had willingly agreed to let her manage my finances during my illness. He admitted he ignored the uneasiness he felt because he was scared of confrontation. His voice broke as he said, "Mom, I failed you when you needed me the most." I placed my hand over his and told him I wasn't angry with him for being misled, but I was heartbroken that he had stopped listening to his own instincts and had let someone else speak for him when it came to his own mother. Healing didn't come instantly, but it began in that moment of truth between us. 2 weeks later, with the legal ownership of my house restored and the fraudulent accounts frozen permanently, I packed my belongings to return to my home. When I walked through my front door again, the familiar scent of old pine floors and Daniel's cologne came rushing back, wrapping around me like a long-awaited embrace. The oak tree he planted in the backyard stood tall and strong, its branches swaying gently as if welcoming me home. I stood there in the doorway, not as a victim who had lost everything, but as a woman who had reclaimed her identity, dignity, and future. It wasn't just a house. It was the final promise I had kept to myself and to Daniel, that our legacy would not be erased by greed. The court proceedings against Vanessa moved forward quickly, and although she begged for leniency, claiming her pregnancy should shield her from consequences, the judge reminded everyone in that courtroom that being a parent is not just about giving birth, but about the character and choices you make. Her actions had consequences, and she would face them. As for my son, he asked if he could visit me regularly, this time not obligated by guilt, but motivated by genuine love. Slowly, our bond began to mend. My granddaughter Lily came over every Sunday, and her laughter once again filled the halls that had once echoed with grief. I set up a scholarship fund in Daniel's name, using funds recovered from the fraudulent transactions, not out of revenge, but out of purpose, to help young people in our town pursue studies in ethics and law, so what happened to me would inspire the next generation to fight for justice. In those quiet afternoons, I often sat on my porch swing with Lily beside me, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. One evening, she asked, "Grandma, were you scared when all that was happening?" I smiled and told her the truth. Yes, I was scared. But courage doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you choose to do what's right, even when fear is louder than your heartbeat. And in that moment, I realized the true ending of this story was not the arrest or the recovery of money. It was the restoration of voice, of identity, of family bonds grounded in truth rather than control. This experience taught me that silence can be dangerous when it is used to hide injustice, and that speaking up is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of survival. It reminded me that strength is not measured by how much you can endure quietly, but by the moment you decide you will endure no more. While Vanessa had tried to write the ending of my life for me, I chose to pick up the pen and write my own. And to anyone listening right now, if someone has tried to take your dignity, your home, or your voice, let this be your sign. You are not powerless. Stand up, speak up, and let the world hear your truth, because your life is worth protecting. Justice does not begin in the courtroom. It begins in the moment you decide to fight back. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Your voice matters. and your story could be the next one that inspires someone to take their power back.